Have you ever gotten a job that seemed too good to be true? Have you ever wondered if you were hired for who you are, or for what you represent? What would you do if you discovered that your dream company had an expiration date on your employment before you even walked through the door? How far would you go to expose the truth if it meant destroying your career in the process? My name is Kelsey Whitlow and I'm 34 years old. I worked as a communication strategist with Strategies. The day they fired me, I knew it had been the plan all along. I just didn't know why, until I cracked their email server and found my name on a temporary hire list with an expiration date circled in red. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 months earlier, my phone buzzed at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt like any other. Kelsey Whitlow speaking, I answered, balancing my coffee while reviewing polling data from my cramped DC apartment. Ms. Whitlow? This is Jennifer from Strategies. We'd like to schedule an interview. Strategies. The name alone made my pulse quicken. The most prestigious communications firm in Washington, the kind of place that shaped presidential campaigns and rewrote political narratives. I'd applied months ago, never expecting a response. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake, I said, setting down my mug. I don't think I'm quite what you're looking for. Jennifer's laugh was warm but practiced. Actually, you're exactly what we need. Your rural Ohio background, your fresh perspective on cross-partisan messaging, we're very interested. My conservative politics had been a liability everywhere else in this blue city. At Strategies, they were suddenly calling it an asset. Can you come in Thursday at 3 p.m.? I said yes, but as I hung up, a nagging question lingered. Why now? Why me? What I didn't know was that this call would destroy everything I thought I knew about Washington. And teach me exactly how disposable I really was. The Strategies office screamed power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Potomac, and every wall displayed photos of the firm's greatest hits, election victories, policy wins, crisis management successes that had become legend. Kelsey, welcome. Michael Torres greeted me with a firm handshake. As managing partner, his approval could change my career trajectory forever. The interview felt surreal. 3 partners sat across from me, nodding enthusiastically as I discussed messaging strategies for rural voter outreach. Your perspective is refreshing, said Catherine Rodriguez, the creative director. Too many firms live in the DC bubble. We need voices that represent every American. Your small-town background brings authenticity, added James Fletcher, head of strategy. Clients are demanding more nuanced approaches to red state messaging. They offered me the position before I even left the building. Senior communications strategist. 6-figure salary. Full benefits. Everything I'd dreamed of since moving to Washington 3 years ago. But as I shook hands and accepted their congratulations, I caught something in their exchanged glances, a look of satisfaction that seemed disproportionate to hiring one mid-level strategist. Walking out, I felt like I was floating. Finally, someone valued what I brought to the table. If I'd looked back at that conference room, I would have seen them already discussing how long they'd need to keep me around. The answer, I'd later learn, was exactly until the midterm elections. My first day at Strategies felt like stepping into a different universe. The office hummed with the energy of people who moved mountains for a living. Campaign posters lined the hallways, all Democrats, I noticed, but that was DC for you. Kelsey. Catherine appeared at my cubicle with a stack of files. Perfect timing. We're migrating all our client communications to a new archive system. Your compliance background makes you perfect to oversee the data transfer. Compliance background, that was generous. I'd done some regulatory work at my previous job, but hardly enough to qualify as an expert. Still, the assignment seemed straightforward. Ensure sensitive client information was properly categorized and secured during the digital migration. You'll have access to everything, Catherine continued. Historical campaigns, strategy documents, internal communications. The whole treasure trove. Just make sure it's all properly encrypted and indexed. The access was extraordinary for someone 3 days into the job. But they framed it as a necessity. Someone needed to verify data integrity during the transfer, and I was the only person without active campaign responsibilities. My first assignment was developing messaging for a Midwest energy client. Simple enough. I crafted talking points that acknowledged farming concerns while promoting green jobs. The kind of balanced approach that had served me well in Ohio. During the team meeting, I presented my strategy. Polite nods all around. Interesting perspective, Michael said. We'll definitely consider incorporating some of these elements. After the meeting, I overheard Catherine whispering to James, "Perfect. Exactly what we needed for the deck." I assumed she meant my ideas. I was wrong. That evening, I spotted my employee photo being uploaded to the company website. Prominently featured on the Our Team page, more prominently than strategists who'd been there for years. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. 2 weeks in, I was assigned to the Morrison Senate campaign, a moderate Democrat running in a purple state. High stakes, high profile, exactly the kind of work I'd dreamed of doing. "We need your touch on the rural messaging," Michael explained, sliding a brief across my desk. "Your background makes you uniquely qualified." The brief was detailed, professional, exactly what I expected. But tucked in the appendix was a page that made my stomach drop. Consultant profile, Kelsey Whitlow. Rural Ohio native, conservative-leaning centrist, faith-adjacent values. Brings authentic red state perspective to messaging development. Faith-adjacent? Conservative-leaning? They'd reduced my entire identity to marketing bullet points. I found Catherine in her office. "Can we talk about this consultant profile?" She barely looked up from her laptop. "Oh, that's just for client presentations. Standard stuff. Helps them understand your value add. But these descriptions, they're not entirely accurate. Marketing is about positioning, Kelsey. You bring something unique to the table, embrace it." Walking back to my desk, I passed the conference room where the Morrison team was meeting. Through the glass, I could see Catherine presenting. My photo was on the screen. "Meet our secret weapon," I heard her say. Conservative credibility with crossover appeal. The data migration project suddenly made more sense. They hadn't given me access because of my compliance expertise. They'd given me access because they planned to control exactly what I could find. But databases are funny things. Sometimes they reveal more than intended. And I was about to discover just how much they'd been hiding. The Morrison campaign launch was everything I'd imagined my DC debut would be. Packed room, influential attendees, energy crackling through the air. I sat in the front row, proud to be part of something this significant. Morrison took the stage, delivering the speech our team had crafted. The rural messaging section, my section, landed perfectly. Applause filled the room. But when Morrison began the Q&A, something shifted. A reporter asked about the campaign's outreach to conservative voters. "We have tremendous confidence in our cross-partisan messaging," Morrison replied. "In fact, we have a Republican strategist on our team who's helping us navigate those relationships." My blood ran cold. A Republican strategist. Singular. He was talking about me. Except I wasn't a Republican strategist on the Morrison campaign, I was a Strativus employee working on messaging strategy. The distinction mattered. After the event, I cornered Catherine. "Morrison just called me a Republican strategist. That's not accurate." "Relax," she said, checking her phone. "It's good for your profile. Bipartisan credibility is valuable in this town. But I'm not working for Morrison as a Republican operative. I'm working for Strativus as a communications strategist." Catherine finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Kelsey, you're overthinking this. Trust the process." But as I watched her walk away, I realized I was beginning to understand the process all too well. The data migration project had been running for 2 weeks. That night, I decided to dig deeper into the archives I was supposedly securing. What I found in a forgotten folder labeled temp_hires_2024 would change everything. My name was there, along with a notation that made my hands shake. Contract duration, hire through NOV elections. Optics value, high. Retention risk, monitor quarterly. They hadn't hired me despite being Republican. They'd hired me because of it, and they'd always planned to throw me away. Over the next few weeks, subtle changes began appearing in my work environment. Small things, easily dismissed individually, but forming a clear pattern when viewed together. My project timeline suddenly required additional approvals that no one else seemed to need. During team meetings, my speaking time was quietly reduced. When I suggested messaging strategies, the responses shifted from "interesting perspective" to "we'll take that under advisement." The healthcare messaging I developed over the weekend, carefully crafted to appeal to both urban and rural audiences, was nowhere to be found in the client presentation. Instead, they'd used generic talking points that could have been written by any DC strategist. What happened to my rural messaging framework? I asked James during the team debrief. We went in a different direction, he replied without looking up from his notes. But having you on the team really strengthened our credibility with the client. There it was again. My presence mattered more than my work. During lunch, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my worst fears. Two junior associates were discussing the morning's presentation. Did you see how excited the client got when they mentioned having a conservative on the team? Right? It's like having a unicorn. Instant credibility without actually changing anything. That afternoon, HR scheduled a routine check-in about my cultural adjustment to the firm. The questions were probing. How was I finding the team dynamic? Did I feel my perspectives were being heard? Any concerns about workplace compatibility? I answered diplomatically, but the message was clear. They were building a file. By 6 p.m., the office was nearly empty. I sat at my desk, reviewing every project I'd worked on since starting at Strativis. The pattern was unmistakable. My ideas were consistently shelved, modified beyond recognition, or credited to other team members. But my name appeared prominently in every client communication. During the data migration project, I'd been systematically cataloging client files. Tonight, I decided to catalog something else, evidence of my own marginalization. What I discovered in the personnel management folders would prove I wasn't paranoid, I was targeted. Hidden in the personnel archives was a folder I shouldn't have seen, staff_management_protocols_2024. My name appeared in a spreadsheet labeled Diversity Hire Assessment Matrix. Every minority employee was listed with performance metrics, but also something called retention value score. Most had scores between 3 to 6. Mine was a 9. The notes column provided the explanation: exceptional optics value. Conservative background provides crucial cross-partisan credibility for purple state campaigns. Recommend maintain through midterm cycle. Midterm cycle. There it was in black and white, an expiration date on my employment. I scrolled through other files in the folder. Templates for performance improvement plans that were clearly designed to create paper trails for predetermined terminations. Scripts for HR conversations that would establish cultural fit concerns. Even draft termination letters with blanks for names and specific infractions. This wasn't just about me. This was a systematic approach to managing problematic employees. One file was particularly chilling: Patricia Lewis, termination case study. It detailed how they'd gradually isolated a former strategist, documented minor performance issues, and ultimately constructed a termination case that looked performance-based rather than ideological. The final memo in Patricia's file was dated 3 weeks after her firing. Subject: seeking employment at competing firms. Recommend discreet negative reference campaign. They destroyed her career even after she was gone. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification: team strategy session, tomorrow 9 a.m., all staff required. I had a feeling I knew what that meeting would be about. But I also had something they didn't know I possessed. A complete backup of their personnel management protocols, saved to an encrypted drive that existed far beyond their corporate firewall. The data migration project had taught me more than just database management. It had taught me how to make digital evidence disappear, or in this case, how to make sure it never disappeared at all. The all-staff meeting was called to discuss messaging optimization for Q3 campaign initiatives. Translation. They were realigning resources for the final push toward midterms. Michael stood at the front of the conference room, projecting authority and confidence. We're entering the most critical phase of the election cycle. Every campaign, every message, every public appearance needs to be flawless. He began reassigning team members to different campaigns. High-profile races got the senior strategists. Lower-tier contests were distributed among junior staff. My name wasn't called. Kelsey, Michael said finally, we're moving you to a special project. Quality assurance for our messaging consistency across all campaigns. It's a crucial role, making sure our rural outreach maintains authenticity. Quality assurance. The corporate equivalent of being sent to Siberia. Catherine handed me a folder. You'll be reviewing all rural messaging materials for accuracy and tone. No client contact necessary, just internal review and recommendations. I flipped through the assignment. It was busy work, designed to keep me occupied while removing me from anything that mattered. The kind of role that would justify a poor performance review when the time came. Any questions? Michael asked. Just one, I said, closing the folder. Am I the only person being reassigned to quality assurance? You're uniquely qualified for this role, James interjected. Your background makes you the perfect person to ensure authenticity. After the meeting, I overheard Catherine and James discussing the changes. Think she suspects anything? Doesn't matter. 2 months and we're done with the election cycle anyway. What about afterward? Performance review in November. Write-up for project reassignment resistance. Standard protocol. They were following a script I'd already read in their personnel files. That evening, I made a decision that would either save my career or end it permanently. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every email, every slight and microaggression. If they wanted to build a case against me, I'd build a better case against them. But I needed help. Professional help from someone who understood how these games were played. And I knew exactly who to call. Eli Torres wasn't related to Michael Torres, despite sharing a last name. Where Michael was polished establishment, Eli was scrappy independent. An investigative journalist who'd built a reputation exposing DC corruption from his one-person operation. More importantly, Eli had been blacklisted by Strativis. 2 years earlier, he tried to interview Michael about questionable client relationships. Not only had Michael refused to comment, but Strativis had pressured other sources to stop talking to Eli. His investigation fizzled, but he'd never forgotten the slight. I found his contact information in some old Morrison campaign files. Apparently he'd been trying to interview someone on our team about rural messaging strategies. The phone rang twice before his gravelly voice answered, Torres. Mr. Torres, this is Kelsey Whitlow. I work at Strativis Strategies. I think we should meet. Silence stretched across the line. When he spoke again, his tone was careful. What kind of meeting? The kind where I buy coffee and you bring a recorder. When? Tomorrow. Noon. The coffee shop on K Street across from the Marriott. How do I know this isn't a setup? I understood his caution. Strativis had probably tried to manipulate him before. Because, I said, I have access to their personnel management protocols. And I think you'll find the employee termination procedures very interesting. Another pause. What's your angle here? I'm about to become their next case study in performance-based termination. But I have something they don't know I have. Which is proof that it's all a lie. After hanging up, I spent the evening preparing. I copied every relevant file to multiple secure drives, encrypted my personal communications, and prepared a summary document outlining everything I'd discovered. If I was going to burn bridges, I wanted to make sure the fire was hot enough to be seen from space. But as I fell asleep that night, one thought kept nagging at me: what if they were already watching? What if this was all part of their protocol for managing high-risk personnel? What if I was walking into exactly the trap they designed for someone like me? The coffee shop was crowded enough to provide cover but quiet enough for conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table with clear sightlines to the door. Eli Torres looked exactly like his byline photo: rumpled jacket, tired eyes, the expression of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. He spotted me immediately. Probably because I was the only person in the place wearing a suit at noon on a Wednesday. "Kelsey Whitlow?" He slid into the chair across from me, setting a small digital recorder on the table. "Before we start, I need to know, are you speaking for Strativus or against them?" "Against," I said without hesitation. "Definitively against." His expression sharpened. "What changed?" I spent the next hour laying out everything. The token hiring, the gradual marginalization, and most importantly, the personnel management protocols I discovered during the data migration project. "You're describing a sophisticated operation," Eli said when I finished. "Systematic manipulation of employees based on political identity. That's not just workplace discrimination, that's a pattern of civil rights violations. I have documentation." "How much?" "Enough to prove it's systematic. Employee assessment matrices, termination protocols, even template documents for building cases against targeted staff." Eli's eyes lit up with the kind of hunger only investigative journalists understand. "Can you get me copies?" "Already done." I slid a flash drive across the table. "That's just the beginning. There's more if you're interested." He pocketed the drive without looking at it. "What do you want in return?" "Protection. When this story breaks, they're going to come after me with everything they have. I need someone who can document their retaliation in real time. And if I can't verify your claims, then you expose me as a fraud and move on." "But Eli?" I met his eyes. "You will be able to verify them." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Why now? Why not when you first suspected something?" "Because 3 weeks ago, I still thought this was about politics. Now I know it's about power. And I'm not the only one they've destroyed." As we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. But walking back to the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The Strativus annual retreat was held at a boutique resort in rural Virginia. Ironic, considering their obvious discomfort with anything outside the Beltway. 2 days of strategic planning, team building, and what Michael called vision alignment. I packed carefully, including my favorite red baseball cap. No logo, no slogan, just a simple red cap I'd worn to Ohio State games since college. It felt like a small piece of home. The first day went smoothly enough. Breakout sessions on messaging innovation, client development workshops, the usual consulting firm activities. I participated earnestly, still hoping my ideas might gain traction despite the mounting evidence of my marginalization. That evening, during the outdoor barbecue, I threw on my red cap to keep the sun out of my eyes. The conversation around the picnic table was light: favorite vacation spots, weekend plans, the kind of small talk that supposedly builds team cohesion. "Nice hat," said Tyler from the creative team, but his tone carried an edge I couldn't quite identify. "Thanks," I replied, not thinking much of it. But I noticed the conversation shift after that. People started checking their phones, excusing themselves from the table. Within 20 minutes, I was sitting mostly alone. Later that night, walking past the resort's business center, I heard familiar voices through the partially open door. Michael, Catherine, and James were huddled around a laptop. "Did you see Tyler's photo?" Catherine was saying. "Red hat alert," James replied with a laugh. "Who brought Fox News to the retreat?" My stomach dropped. "They were talking about me." "It's fine," Michael said. "But this confirms what we discussed. The optics are becoming problematic. Timeline? Catherine asked. Post-election. Give it 2 weeks after midterms, then initiate the performance review process. I slipped away before they could see me, but the damage was done. A red hat. That's all it took to accelerate their timeline. Monday morning brought an email I wasn't supposed to receive, a Slack thread accidentally forwarded by an intern who'd mixed up distribution lists. The thread was from Saturday night, during the retreat. Someone had posted a photo of me from behind, red cap visible, sitting at the barbecue table. The comments made my chest tight. Tyler, red hat alert, who brought Fox News? Sarah from accounts, please tell me that's not what I think it is. Bradley from digital. At least it's not the other red hat. Catherine, let's keep this professional, team. Michael, noted. We'll address appearance guidelines this week. But the thread continued after their retreat room conversation. James, midterms are close. No space for ambiguity. Catherine, agreed. Accelerate the timeline. Michael, I'll handle it. Performance review scheduled for November 15th. The final message was timestamped at 11:47 p.m. Saturday. Documentation phase begins Monday. Initiate quality assurance resistance protocols. Quality assurance resistance protocols. They were going to manufacture evidence that I was failing at the meaningless job they'd assigned me. I forwarded the thread to a secure email account, then immediately contacted Eli. They've accelerated their timeline, I told him when he answered. 2 weeks after the midterms. Can you prove it? I just sent you a Slack thread where they discuss the exact date. Silence on the other end. Then. Jesus. They're not even trying to hide it internally. That's not the worst part, I said. They have protocols for manufacturing performance issues. I found the templates in their personnel files. How long do we have? 6 weeks. Maybe less if they decide I'm becoming too much of a risk. Then we need to move faster, Eli said. I'll have the first story ready by Friday. But Kelsey? Be careful. If they're monitoring your digital activity. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I was walking a tightrope, and they controlled both ends. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. The data migration project had given me access to backups they'd forgotten existed. And those backups contained secrets that went far beyond employee management. My access to the data migration system was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to ensure proper file transfer and encryption. But whoever managed my permissions had been careless, leaving me with read access to archived files dating back years. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense that my personal situation was part of something larger, I began exploring older folders during my lunch breaks. What I found painted a picture of Strativis that differed sharply from their public image. Buried in a folder labeled client_research_2019-2022 were documents that made my pulse quicken. Opposition research on their clients' opponents, normal enough for a political consulting firm. But some files contained personal information that had nothing to do with politics, financial troubles, family problems, medical issues. This wasn't opposition research. It was blackmail material. One file was particularly disturbing, a comprehensive dossier on a federal judge who'd ruled against a Strativis client in 2020. Photos of his adult daughter leaving a substance abuse clinic. Details about his wife's mental health treatment. Bank records showing a brief financial crisis during their divorce. None of this was illegal to obtain, but using it to influence judicial decisions certainly was. The most chilling part was the clinical language in the internal memos. Target neutralized. Opposition management successful. Leverage deployment achieved desired outcome. They were talking about destroying people's lives with the same tone most consultants use to discuss poll numbers. I was copying the files to a secure drive when my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Performance check-in, tomorrow 3 p.m., Torres office. The meeting I'd been dreading was finally here. But now I had something they didn't expect, proof that my termination was just a small part of a much larger criminal enterprise. If they wanted to destroy me, I'd make sure I took them down with me. Michael's office commanded a view of the Washington Monument, but I barely noticed the scenery. He sat behind his mahogany desk, hands folded, wearing the expression of someone about to deliver unpleasant news. Janet from HR sat in the corner with a legal pad, ready to document our conversation. Kelsey, thanks for coming in, Michael began. We wanted to touch base about your current project assignments and overall integration with the team. Here it comes. Your quality assurance work has been thorough, he continued, but we've noticed some concerns about your engagement with the broader team dynamic. What kind of concerns? Janet consulted her notes. Several colleagues have mentioned communication challenges. Questions about messaging decisions that seemed adversarial. Resistance to collaborative feedback. They were using my questions about sidelined rural messaging strategies as evidence of poor teamwork. I thought asking questions was part of strategic development, I said carefully. Of course, Michael replied. But there's a difference between productive inquiry and challenging established processes. Your approach has been perceived as disruptive. By whom? That's not really the issue, Janet interjected. What matters is creating a collaborative environment where everyone feels heard. The irony was suffocating. They were lecturing me about feeling heard while systematically silencing my contributions. What are you recommending? I asked. A formal development plan, Michael said, sliding a document across his desk. Clear goals for team integration, communication protocols, and performance benchmarks. I skimmed the document. It was a roadmap to termination. Impossible deadlines, subjective evaluation criteria, and requirements that would isolate me from any meaningful work. This seems pretty comprehensive for someone who's been here 3 months. We believe in being proactive, Janet said. Early intervention prevents larger issues down the road. And if I don't agree to this plan? Michael's expression hardened slightly. I think that would demonstrate exactly the kind of resistance we're trying to address. I signed the document, knowing it was theater. They'd already decided my fate, this was just paperwork to justify it. But as I walked back to my desk, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. The gloves were finally off. No more pretending this was about performance or team fit. Now it was war. That evening, I called Eli with a decision that would change everything. I'm ready to go public, I said without preamble. Full story, complete documentation, my name attached. Are you sure? Once this hits, there's no going back. They just put me on a formal performance improvement plan for asking too many questions. I'm already done, this just makes it official. Eli was quiet for a moment. I've been working on the story since our last conversation. The employee management protocols are damning, but what you found in their client research files. Kelsey, this isn't just workplace discrimination. This is evidence of systematic corruption. How soon can you publish? 48 hours if you're willing to go on record. I've verified 6 cases of coordinated character assassination using their archived communications. The Patterson Mayer case, the federal judge, 3 state legislators. All opposition to Strativa's clients, all destroyed using identical methodologies. My chest tightened. They're still doing it? Active files suggest ongoing operations. This isn't historical corruption. This is a criminal enterprise disguised as a consulting firm. I thought about the performance improvement plan sitting on my desk, the countdown to my predetermined termination, the clinical precision of their employee destruction protocols. What do you need from me? Everything. Full interview, complete documentation, your permission to use your personnel files as a case study. And Kelsey? His voice grew serious. Prepare for retaliation. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Let them try, I said. I'm not Patricia Lewis. I'm not going quietly. After hanging up, I spent the evening preparing for what would either be the most important interview of my life or my professional suicide. But as I fell asleep that night, one thought kept echoing in my mind. sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn down everything around you. Tomorrow, I'd find out if I had enough matches. Eli's recording studio was a converted basement apartment in DuPont Circle, all exposed brick and professional lighting that made it feel more legitimate than his scrappy journalist reputation suggested. "Before we start," he said, adjusting the camera angle, "I need you to understand what you're about to do. This interview will end your career at Strativus and probably make you unemployable at any similar firm in D.C. "They're already ending my career," I replied. "The only question is whether I go down fighting or go down silent." For the next 3 hours, I laid out everything: the token hiring process, the systematic marginalization, the personnel management protocols, and finally, the evidence of client-directed character assassination campaigns. Eli's questions were sharp, professional, designed to anticipate every criticism and counter-argument Strativus would inevitably raise. "Why should people believe you?" he asked. "You're a disgruntled employee with access to internal files. Strativus will claim you're fabricating evidence." "Because I have documentation they can't discredit," I said, pulling out the flash drives. Email threads, personnel assessment matrices, termination templates, active opposition research files. "This isn't he said she said, this is their own words, their own protocols, their own criminal evidence. What do you want to happen?" I thought about Patricia Lewis, working at a nonprofit in Oregon for a third of her previous salary. About the federal judge whose family was targeted for ruling against a Strativus client. About every person who'd been systematically destroyed for crossing this machine. "I want justice," I said finally. "Not just for me, but for everyone they've crushed. I want federal investigations, criminal charges, and an end to this industry's culture of destroying people for profit." After the interview, Eli walked me to my car. "The story goes live tomorrow at 6 a.m. By noon, every major outlet in the country will be covering this. Are you ready?" "I've been ready since they put that red hat photo in their Slack channel," I said. "The only question is whether they're ready for what comes next." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete, unqualified peace. Whatever happened next, I'd told the truth. And sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. Eli hadn't been exaggerating about the story's impact. By 8 a.m., it was the lead item on every major political news site. By noon, cable news was running wall-to-wall coverage. By evening, #Strativus Files was trending nationwide. The headline alone was devastating: "Inside Strativus, leaked documents reveal systematic character assassination campaign and employee discrimination based on political identity." But Eli had done more than just report the facts. He'd crafted a narrative that made resistance impossible. The story opened with Patricia Lewis's case, detailing how a respected strategist had been methodically destroyed for questioning client ethics. My story came second, presented as an ongoing example of the same tactics. The employee management protocols were presented in clinical detail, alongside specific examples of their implementation. The client research files provided evidence that these weren't just workplace violations, they were criminal conspiracies to destroy political opponents. Most damaging of all, Eli had obtained external verification for several character assassination campaigns. The federal judge confirmed that personal information about his family had been leaked to media outlets immediately after his ruling. The Patterson mayor provided documentation of the coordinated social media attacks that had destroyed his career. My phone had been buzzing constantly since the story broke. Reporters requesting follow-up interviews, former colleagues expressing shock, and not a little fear, and, most surprisingly, messages of support from people I'd never met. But the call I'd been waiting for came at 4:17 p.m. "Kelsey. This is Michael Torres." I let the silence stretch before responding. "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. These allegations, they're taken completely out of context. We'd like to offer you a consulting position to help clear this up." The same offer they'd probably made to every employee they'd planned to destroy. "What kind of consulting position?" "Reputation management. 6 months, $150,000. Help us develop a response strategy that acknowledges areas for improvement while maintaining client confidence. I almost laughed. Even now, facing federal scrutiny and media firestorm, they were following their scripts. That's interesting, I said. When would you need an answer? As soon as possible. This situation is developing rapidly. I'll consider it and get back to you. After hanging up, I immediately called Eli. They just offered me $150,000 to help with damage control. Jesus. Are they serious? Dead serious. And I'm going to take it. Kelsey, what are you talking about? Taking their money would destroy your credibility. Taking their money would destroy my credibility, I agreed. But accepting their offer? That's something else entirely. I called Michael back at 8 a.m. sharp. I accept your consulting offer, I said without preamble. When do we start? Immediately. Can you come in this morning? We're implementing a comprehensive crisis response strategy. I imagine you are. The Strativus office had transformed overnight. Half the staff looked shell-shocked, the other half were working phones frantically. Emergency damage control meetings were happening in every conference room. Michael greeted me with forced enthusiasm. Kelsey, thank you for coming back. We know yesterday's story was challenging, but your perspective is crucial right now. I'm here to help, I said, and meant it, just not in the way he imagined. They set me up in a temporary office and immediately began briefing me on their crisis response strategy. The plan was sophisticated: acknowledge communication missteps, while denying criminal wrongdoing, present my return as evidence of internal reconciliation, and gradually shift blame to rogue employees who'd misinterpreted standard research protocols. We need messaging that shows we're taking this seriously without admitting liability, Catherine explained during our first strategy session. Your voice carries special credibility right now. Over the next 6 hours, I participated in conference calls with lawyers, wrote talking points for press interviews, and helped craft a statement that acknowledged areas for improvement in their research methodologies. I was the perfect inside saboteur. Enthusiastic, helpful, and secretly recording everything. The breakthrough came during lunch, when I was alone in the conference room reviewing documents for the afternoon session. Michael's assistant had left behind notes from the morning's leadership meeting, including a detailed discussion of the Whitlow neutralization failure. The notes revealed their complete strategy. Use my consulting contract to establish a financial relationship that would undermine my credibility as a whistleblower. If questioned about paying me, they'd claim it proved the accusations were false. Why would they hire someone who'd legitimately exposed criminal activity? Meanwhile, they were secretly preparing a second wave of retaliation. Document KW's participation in damage control strategy. Use cooperation to establish pattern of unreliability and opportunism. They weren't just buying my silence. They were building a case to destroy my credibility permanently. At 3 p.m., I excused myself for a media call and stepped outside. Eli was waiting across the street with a camera crew. Did you get what we need? He asked. I handed him a flash drive containing every recording, document, and strategy session from the day. Everything. Including their plan to use my consulting contract against me. Unbelievable. They really thought you'd fall for it? They thought I was desperate enough to trade my integrity for money. I looked back at the building where my former colleagues were crafting lies to protect our criminal enterprise. They were catastrophically wrong. Eli's follow-up story hit like a nuclear bomb. Exclusive: Strativus attempts to buy whistleblowers' silence hours after criminal allegations surface, ran with audio recordings of my conversations with Michael, internal strategy documents about using my consulting contract to undermine my credibility, and a complete timeline of their attempted manipulation. But this story did something the first one hadn't. It provided real-time evidence of ongoing criminal behavior. While claiming to cooperate with authorities, Strativus had simultaneously been orchestrating a sophisticated campaign to discredit their accuser and manipulate public perception. The recordings were devastating. Michael's voice, clear as day, explaining how my consulting contract would establish financial motivation for false accusations. Catherine discussing how to leverage Kelsey's participation in damage control to demonstrate her unreliability. By noon, federal agents were at the Strativus offices executing search warrants. By evening, 3 senior partners had been arrested on charges ranging from criminal conspiracy to obstruction of justice. My phone rang constantly, interview requests from 60 Minutes, calls from congressional staffers, messages from other victims who'd found courage to speak publicly. But the call that mattered most came from Patricia Lewis. "I saw the story," she said, her voice thick with emotion. 5 years. 5 years I thought I was crazy, that maybe I really had been a bad employee. "You weren't crazy," I told her. "None of us were. The FBI contacted me this morning. They want to interview me about my termination. Are you going to do it?" "Hell yes," she said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. It's time these bastards paid for what they did. That evening, I sat in my apartment watching cable news coverage of the federal raids. Footage of agents carrying boxes of documents out of the Strativus offices. Talking heads discussing the implications for the broader political consulting industry. But the image that stayed with me was Michael Torres, in handcuffs, being led to a federal vehicle. The same man who'd shaken my hand 3 months ago and told me I was exactly what they needed. He'd been right about that. I was exactly what they needed. Just not in the way he'd imagined. The Strativus scandal didn't just destroy one firm, it triggered an industry-wide reckoning. Within a week, 3 other political consulting firms were under federal investigation. Former employees came forward with similar stories of systematic discrimination and client-directed character assassination campaigns. The techniques Strativus had pioneered weren't unique, they were industry standard. Congressional hearings were announced. The FEC opened a dozen new investigations. State bar associations began reviewing the conduct of attorneys who'd participated in Strativus operations. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source, Strativus's own clients. Major corporations began auditing their contracts, discovering that reputation management services had included activities that exposed them to massive legal liability. A pharmaceutical company found evidence that Strativus had targeted patient advocacy groups who'd criticized their pricing. A defense contractor learned that federal employees had been investigated for questioning contract awards. The civil lawsuits started flying. Within a month, Strativus faced over $50 million in legal claims from victims of their operations. Their malpractice insurance was immediately canceled. Their bank accounts were frozen pending criminal proceedings. The firm that had seemed untouchable 3 months earlier was now a toxic wasteland that no one would defend. My role in all this had evolved beyond whistleblower. I was testifying before congressional committees, providing expert witness testimony in federal court, and consulting with other victims who were building their own cases. The nonprofit I'd joined, Eli's investigative journalism organization, had received so many tips about political consulting corruption that we'd hired 3 additional investigators just to handle the volume. But the moment that made everything worthwhile came during a congressional hearing on political consulting reform. Ms. Whitlow, the committee chairman, asked, "What would you say to other employees in this industry who might be witnessing similar practices?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about every person who'd been told they were crazy, difficult, or simply not a good fit. "I'd say you're not imagining it," I replied. "You're not too sensitive or too combative or too difficult. If you're seeing systematic abuse, it's real. And if you have the courage to speak up, you won't be alone." The hearing room was silent for a moment. Then, spontaneous applause. Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than revenge. 6 months after my first conversation with Eli Torres, Michael Torres, no relation, sat in federal court facing charges that could put him away for 15 years. The prosecution's case was devastating. Financial records showing payments to professional trolls. Email chains coordinating character assassination campaigns. Audio recordings of strategy sessions where they discussed neutralizing political opponents through personal destruction. And at the center of it all, The personnel management protocols that had documented their systematic discrimination against employees based on political identity. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every document, every conversation, every step in their criminal conspiracy. The defense tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ms. Whitlow, the prosecutor asked during my final day of testimony, in your opinion, was your termination about performance? No, I replied, looking directly at Michael. It was about expiration date. I was hired to provide political cover through the midterm elections, then discarded when I was no longer useful. The performance issues were manufactured to justify a decision they'd made before I ever walked in the door. The defense's cross-examination was brutal but ultimately pointless. Every attack they made on my credibility was contradicted by Strativis's own documents. Every suggestion that I'd fabricated evidence was undermined by recordings and emails in Michael's own voice. When the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts, I felt something I hadn't expected: sadness. Not for Michael, he'd earned every year of his sentence. But for the industry we'd all been part of, the corrupted ecosystem that had made this kind of behavior not just possible, but profitable. Catherine Rodriguez got 2 years. James Fletcher received 18 months. A dozen other employees were sentenced to fines and community service. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences. It was the systematic reform that followed. Congress passed the Political Consulting Transparency Act, requiring firms to disclose their research methodologies and prohibiting the use of personal information unrelated to public service. The Justice Department created a new unit focused on political corruption. State ethics boards gained new powers to investigate consultant misconduct. Most importantly, other victims found their voices. The Strativis case had opened floodgates that couldn't be closed. The industry that had destroyed so many lives was finally being held accountable. A year after the first story broke, I was working from a coffee shop in Georgetown when a familiar notification popped up on my phone. Google alert, Strativis strategies. The story was about the building that had once housed their offices. New tenants were moving in, a renewable energy nonprofit and a small tech startup focused on government transparency. The irony wasn't lost on me. My life had changed completely. The investigative journalism nonprofit had grown into a major player in DC accountability reporting. We'd exposed corruption in 3 federal agencies, forced the resignation of 2 congressional staff directors, and helped pass legislation strengthening whistleblower protections. My personal brand, if that's what you called it, had evolved from token conservative hire to corruption fighter. Speaking engagements at universities, consulting contracts with ethics organizations, regular appearances on Sunday morning political shows. The money was better than anything I'd made at Strativis. More importantly, the work actually mattered. But the most satisfying development was personal. I'd received a call from Ohio State, asking if I'd be interested in teaching a graduate course on political ethics and whistleblowing. We'd love to have someone with your real-world experience, the department chair had explained. Students need to understand that integrity isn't just an abstract concept, it's a choice you make every day. I'd accepted immediately. Going home to Ohio, to the university where I'd first fallen in love with political strategy, felt like completing a circle. The red baseball cap that had caused so much trouble at the Strativis retreat now sat on my desk, not as a symbol of political identity, but as a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of authenticity can trigger the largest consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Eli. New tip just came in. Consulting firm in Virginia. Similar patterns to Strativis. Interested? I smiled, finished my coffee, and typed back, send me everything. The fight for integrity in political consulting was far from over. But now, at least, we had a playbook for winning. And I had something I'd never possessed at Strativis, a job where being authentic was actually part of the job description. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. My first day teaching at Ohio State brought back memories of sitting in similar classrooms 20 years earlier, dreaming of changing the world through political strategy. How many of you want to work in Washington? I asked the graduate seminar on political ethics and practice. About half the hands went up. How many of you think you'll be able to maintain your integrity while doing it? The same hand stayed up, but with less confidence. Let me tell you a story, I said, about a communications strategist who thought she could be authentic in a world built on manipulation. Over the next 90 minutes, I walked them through the Strativus case, not just the headlines and criminal charges, but the day-to-day compromises that made the bigger corruption possible. The small choices that seemed harmless at the time. The rationalization. The gradual erosion of principles in pursuit of career advancement. The most dangerous moment, I told them, wasn't when they put me on the termination list. It was when I first saw that consultant profile reducing me to marketing bullet points and decided to let it slide. A student raised her hand. But you needed the job, right? Wasn't fighting it career suicide? I thought so at the time, I replied. But you know what's actually career suicide? Becoming someone you don't recognize. Building expertise in things that don't matter. Spending your talent propping up a system that destroys people for profit. Another student, so what's the alternative? Not everyone can be a whistleblower. The alternative is being honest every single day. Asking questions when things don't feel right. Refusing to participate in work that compromises your values. Building relationships with people who share your commitment to integrity. I paused, looking around the room at faces that reminded me of my younger self. The political consulting industry is changing because people like you have choices. You can work for firms that value authenticity, or you can start your own and compete against the ones that don't. You can be part of the problem or part of the solution. After class, a student approached me, Alex Chen, a second-year graduate student who'd been unusually quiet during discussion. Professor Whitlow, she said, I've been interning at a firm here in Columbus. Nothing like Strativus, but some things don't feel right. Small things. How do you know when small things are actually big things? I thought about my first day at Strativus, the consultant profile that had reduced me to marketing copy, the moment I'd chosen politeness over principle. Trust your instincts, I told her. And document everything. The most important question isn't whether you're overreacting, it's whether you can live with staying silent. She nodded, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. The same conflict I'd felt 3 years earlier. Alex, I said, handing her my card, if you ever need someone to talk through what you're seeing, call me. Day or night. Walking back to my office, I realized this was why I'd come home to Ohio. Not just to teach political ethics in theory, but to help the next generation avoid the mistakes I'd made. The best way to honor what I'd survived was to make sure others didn't have to survive it at all. 3 years after the Strativus scandal broke, I was keynoting a conference on political consulting ethics in Washington, held, ironically, just 6 blocks from where the firm's offices used to be. The audience was a mix of industry veterans, reform advocates, and young professionals trying to build careers in a fundamentally changed landscape. The same people who would have ignored me as a token hire were now paying to hear my thoughts on the future of their industry. The most important lesson from the Strativus case, I told them, isn't that bad firms get caught. It's that entire industries can change when enough people decide to stop accepting the unacceptable. I outlined the reforms that had followed: mandatory disclosure requirements, enhanced whistleblower protections, federal oversight of political research activities. But more importantly, I talked about the cultural changes. The firms that had voluntarily adopted transparency measures, the clients who'd started asking harder questions about consultant methods, the employees who'd found the courage to speak up about questionable practices. Change doesn't happen because bad actors suddenly become good, I continued. It happens because good people stop pretending they don't see what's happening around them. During the Q&A, a familiar face caught my attention in the third row. Patricia Lewis, now running her own consulting firm in Portland, specializing in nonprofit advocacy and community organizing. Ms. Whitlow, she said when I called on her, what would you say to someone who's been out of the industry for several years and is thinking about returning? I smiled, understanding the real question. I'd say the industry needs people who've seen how bad it can get and are committed to making it better. Your experience, our experience, isn't just valuable for what we learned about corruption. It's valuable for what we learned about courage. After the conference, Patricia and I walked to a coffee shop near the old Strativus building. 5 years ago, I thought my career was over, she said, stirring her latte. Now I'm running a firm that's everything Strativus pretended to be, actually helping people, actually making a difference. Any regrets? I asked. About speaking up? Never. About not speaking up sooner? She paused. Every day. We sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd been written off as difficult, combative, not good fits for the industry that had ultimately needed us more than we'd needed it. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex Chin, the student I'd met at Ohio State. She'd graduated and started her own consulting practice in Columbus, specializing in rural political organizing. Just wanted you to know, landed 3 new clients this month. All nonprofits focused on voting rights. Turns out there's a market for ethical consulting. Who knew? I showed the text to Patricia. The next generation gets it. They have good teachers, she replied. As we parted ways, I walked past the building that had once housed Strativus Strategies. A small plaque by the entrance listed the current tenants, a legal aid clinic, an environmental advocacy group, and a nonprofit focused on campaign finance reform. The irony was perfect. The space that had once been used to destroy democratic participation was now occupied by organizations working to strengthen it. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. 5 years after I walked out of Strativus Strategies for the final time, I was sitting in my office at Ohio State, grading final exams for my political ethics seminar, when my phone rang. Professor Whitlow? This is Jessica Martinez from the Washington Post. I'm working on a retrospective piece about the Strativus scandal for the 5th anniversary. Do you have a few minutes? I'd given hundreds of interviews over the years, but anniversary pieces always made me reflective. What's your angle? I asked. The lasting impact. How the case changed the industry, influenced reform, shaped the way people think about whistleblowing in corporate America. I thought about the question while reviewing Alex Chen's final exam. A brilliant analysis of how transparency requirements had shifted power dynamics in political consulting. The immediate impact was obvious, I told Jessica. Criminal charges, federal investigations, industry reform. But the deeper change has been cultural. People now understand that speaking up isn't just morally right, it's professionally viable. Can you give me an example? I pulled up a folder on my computer. I track former students and colleagues who've started their own firms or moved to organizations with strong ethical standards. In the past 5 years, I count 43 people who've built successful careers specifically because they prioritized integrity over expedience. What about the personal cost? Do you ever regret exposing Strativus? I looked around my office. Awards from ethics organizations, thank you letters from other whistleblowers, photos from speaking engagements at universities across the country. The personal cost was losing a job I thought I wanted at a company that never respected me, I said. The personal gain was finding work that actually matters and building relationships with people who value authenticity. Any advice for someone facing a similar situation today? I thought about the dozens of calls and emails I received each month from people witnessing corruption, discrimination, or systematic abuse in their workplaces. Document everything. Find allies. Remember that your integrity is worth more than any job. And understand that staying silent doesn't protect you, it just protects the system that's already planning to destroy you. After the interview, I walked across campus to the coffee shop where I'd started writing this story in my head 6 years earlier. The same place where I'd first realized that being hired as a token meant I was always intended to be disposable. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Strativus partner Michael Torres denied early parole. He'd serve his full sentence, every day he'd earned through his systematic destruction of careers and lives. But my satisfaction wasn't about his punishment anymore. It was about the dozens of former victims who'd rebuilt their careers, the hundreds of students who'd learned from our experience, the thousands of employees who had stronger protections because we'd found the courage to speak. The truth about Washington, about any center of power, is that it's full of people who use others as props in their games. They hire tokens, manage optics, and discard anyone who becomes inconvenient. But sometimes, just sometimes, the props fight back. And when they do, the whole corrupt edifice comes crashing down. I never did wear that red baseball cap again. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew exactly where I stood. The job they never wanted me to have turned out to be the job I was meant to do all along, telling the truth, building something better, and teaching others that integrity isn't just a luxury, it's a strategy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming someone they never imagined you could be. If my story hit home, if you've ever felt used, overlooked, or silenced for what you believe, then you're not alone. I was never supposed to get that job. And once I did, they made sure I wouldn't keep it. But I turned what they meant to be a placeholder into a platform. If you followed my journey to the very end, I'd love for you to like, share, and subscribe. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet when they knew the truth needed to be heard. Because sometimes, the job they never wanted you to have, is the one that sets everything right.